Our existence in Helsinki flowed with a gentle cadence, unassuming yet steady, never clamoring for attention. Finland has a way of guiding you to treasure the hush, to uncover significance in pauses that require no words. For years, our modest flat in Kallio served as a sanctuary of this tranquility, where we savored unpretentious meals, alternated visits to the downstairs sauna, and occasionally stood by the window, observing trams slip by on somber winter nights. I thought this was sufficient. I believed we possessed what many yearned for, a reliable rhythm, a soft kind of unity. Yet quiet can conceal realities. What I viewed as solace, she began to perceive as a widening void between us. The change crept in quietly, almost unnoticed. She started staying late at her workplace or the library, explaining she needed room to reflect. On weekends, while I found contentment chopping wood at our cottage near Espoo, she opted to remain in the city, gravitating toward lively cafes and animated gatherings with friends. I didn't object. In Finland, you respect shifts in temperament without probing. I granted her space, believing it preserved our equilibrium. Our dinners turned mechanical, predictable, rye bread, salmon stew, or sometimes roasted reindeer I'd sourced from Lapland. We still sat facing each other, but her eyes wandered, caught by her phone or fixed on the kitchen clock. My simple inquiries, about her day, her sister, met with shrugs, curt replies, or faint sighs. Even in a culture that prizes brevity, the stillness between us grew dense, suffocating. Helsinki's winter intensified the cold. January cloaks the city in frost, where you depart for work in shadow and return in it, snow silencing the world until it feels suspended. I've always cherished this, the muted trams, the harbor encased in ice, the bundled walks through biting chill. But that year, the heaviness bore down on me. Even sharing a room with her, I felt galaxies apart. Her habits shifted more starkly. She spent evenings out, citing work meetings or yoga sessions in Kamppi. I reassured myself this was ordinary, that people need their own corners. Yet deep down, I saw she no longer anticipated returning home. She'd enter, slip off her boots, hang her coat, and pass by me as if I were part of the decor. There were no quarrels, no raised voices, just a gradual fraying, like ice softening before spring, silent until it shatters. At night, she'd lie in bed, endlessly scrolling, her back turned to me. I'd gaze at the ceiling, tracing faint lines in the plaster, trying to pinpoint when she last chuckled at my subtle wit or looked at me with affection. One Saturday, I proposed a ferry ride to Suomenlinna, a tradition we'd held dear early on. She claimed exhaustion. The next weekend, I suggested chasing the aurora in Rovaniemi. Too much effort, she dismissed. That's when I realized I was alone in trying to stitch together what was unraveling. Our friends noticed too. At a midsummer lakeside gathering, grilling sausages and sipping beer by the fire, she sat apart, engaging only with others. A friend quietly asked me if all was well. I nodded, as is our custom. You don't broadcast personal struggles. But the truth was undeniable. The fractures weren't about silence or routine. They stemmed from her withdrawal, and I, in my persistence, thought more distance would mend it. By autumn, her absences grew more pronounced. Fridays she was gone, saying she needed solitude. Those words stung sharper than any dispute. In Finland, such statements are plain unembellished. She was crafting a life separate from mine. I waited, hoping it was temporary, but weeks stretched into months. I made one last attempt, securing tickets to a Sibelius performance at Finlandia Hall. Music that once bound us. She attended but sat rigidly, her gaze distant, as if confined in an unwanted place. Her thank you afterward was courteous, aloof, the kind reserved for acquaintances. That night I knew, she was no longer my partner, just someone occupying the same space, breathing the same air, but living elsewhere. I didn't challenge her. My father's advice lingered. If it's broken and they won't repair it, you don't force it together. You release it. I held on to hope, waiting for her to turn back, to share a story or pour me wine without prompting. She didn't. The silence, once our common tongue, became a wall, no longer uniting but separating us. One unremarkable evening, with Helsinki's streets dim and snow-laden, I left work early, eager to surprise her, to show I still cared. On the tram, I planned a modest dinner, grilled salmon, potatoes, dill, hoping it might kindle something. I carried a small market bag, imagining her walking in, the aroma softening her. Before reaching the door, I texted, "I'm on my way home." Her reply halted me on the icy steps. "No need. I want to be alone." At first, I thought it was a fleeting request, a need for a few hours. But I reread it. The words were precise, cutting, clear. In Finland, we don't veil intent with niceties. She meant it. My presence was no longer desired. I stood there, breath misting in the chill, the grocery bag heavy. The tram's hum faded, leaving her words echoing in my mind. She didn't ask when I'd return or suggest later. She sought solitude, and in that instant, I realized I had become the opposite of her calm. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I turned away, the wind stinging my face as I walked. My heart thudded, not with rage but with understanding. There was nothing left if she could so plainly ask me not to come home. I roamed past shuttered kiosks and glowing cafes, their warmth mocking the cold within me. At the harbor, where ice edged the dark water, I leaned against the railing, the grocery bag now pointless. I dropped it into a bin, the gesture final, like locking a gate. That night, I took a room in a guest house near Kamppi. The walls were bare, the bed firm, but it was mine. I lay awake, her words replaying, but I didn't weep or fume. I simply understood. She wanted peace, and I could grant it. Not for a night, but permanently. The next morning, I went to work as usual, carrying my briefcase, greeting colleagues, responding to emails. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but inside, the thread binding me to her had snapped. That evening, I didn't board the tram home. Instead, I rented a small furnished flat in Tulo. Days passed without her messages, and I sent none. The silence was colder than Helsinki's air, but it spoke clearly. She thought she sought peace, but peace isn't found in absence. It's crafted in shared moments, in quiet togetherness. She had mistaken my constancy for restraint, and I, honoring her wish, gave her the solitude she desired. Weeks later, I realized her rejection had liberated me. I no longer bore her dissatisfaction. Her words, "I'm on my way home. No need," carried the raw truth of our marriage. I had loved her in my Finnish way, through dependability, presence, and understated devotion. She saw it as confinement. So I stepped back, not in anger but in honesty. I didn't call, didn't ask why. The answer was evident. She wanted distance, and I gave it completely. In my new flat, listening to the city's murmur, I found freedom. Her rejection, though painful, freed me from her unrest. Passing our old street or seeing the tram stirred a pang, not of sorrow, but of something familiar fading. Yet I knew I'd chosen rightly. A man can live in silence, but not as an unwelcome shadow in his own home. The first week after I left was still. She didn't reach out, nor did I. She might have thought I was proving a point, that I'd return once my pride settled. But I wasn't resisting, I was listening. She had her solitude, likely feeling relief at first. No more small talk over meals, no more questions about her day, no more of my footsteps in the flat. She could sprawl in bed, cook what she pleased, leave dishes untouched. But silence shifts. What feels like freedom can grow heavy, like fog that lingers. I settled into my Tulo flat, modest but enough, with a bed, a desk, and a window facing the street. I filled evenings with walks by the frozen bay, boots crunching on ice, watching couples under streetlights. I didn't envy them, but I felt the weight of my solitude, a solitude I chose, and in that choice there was dignity. For her, the flat grew too vast. A mutual friend mentioned she'd called it oddly empty, quieter than she'd anticipated. She hadn't foreseen how my absence would resonate. The empty chair, the cold side of the bed, the missing coat on the rack. She'd sought peace, but peace without companionship became loneliness in disguise. Winter tightened its hold, the long nights enveloping Helsinki. I imagined her by our old window, staring at the tram tracks, the city moving while her world stood still. Finnish winters amplify solitude, the darkness and snow stripping away distractions, leaving you bare with your thoughts. That was her reality now. Her peace had become her confinement. Meanwhile, I found my own rhythm. I visited the community sauna, where steam and silence with strangers eased my burden. I fished on frozen lakes near Espoo, the cold wind sharp but vital. She, though, had traded stability for distractions. Work, yoga, coffee, but returned to a flat that echoed with absence. Her regret grew, not in words to me, but in hints to friends, small admissions of the void she'd created. Months passed, and she reached out with pretexts, a query about mail, then documents. They weren't about those things. They were attempts to reconnect without admitting fault. I responded briefly, offering only facts, respecting the boundary she'd set. At gatherings, friends noticed her fading light. She who once brightened rooms now sat quietly, her eyes lingering on couples, heavy with unspoken regret. One night, a friend said she left a dinner early, claiming illness, but I knew it was the weight of her choice. My absence, which she hadn't expected to be permanent, had become a wound she couldn't ignore. For me, the pain dimmed. Her absence became like the cold, a fact you adapt to. I didn't push back or plead, as she might have expected. I vanished, and that silence spoke louder than any argument. Her flat, her bed, her life carried my absence in every corner. She'd thought she wanted freedom, but she'd lost the steadiness I brought, the quiet strength she'd dismissed. In Tullow, my flat became more than temporary. It was liberation. No half-empty glasses, no shoes signaling her presence but not her heart. I brewed strong coffee, walked to work through icy streets and cooked for myself, mushrooms, perch, or simple rye bread with cheese. These meals tasted better, free of tension. I rediscovered joys, hiking in Nuxio National Park, fishing with a colleague, Thursday saunas in Espoo where men shared sparse words and plunged into icy water. I traveled to Tampere, wandering its red brick streets, sipping dark beer in pubs, anonymous and unburdened. Her world, I heard through friends, contracted. The flat, once her haven, became a reminder of emptiness. No shared coffee, no weekend plans. She dressed less carefully, spoke less vibrantly, left gatherings early. Friends asked if she was okay, but I only shrugged. I no longer carried her burdens. I took up photography, capturing Helsinki's trams, children on frozen ponds, dusk over the cathedral. Through the lens, I saw beauty again. Details I'd missed while trying to salvage a fading marriage. Spring arrived, melting ice and lengthening days. I felt myself awaken, no longer weighed by her discontent. She, though, faced the absence of my presence. An empty balcony chair, silent mornings without birdsong. Her peace had become her unrest. My revenge wasn't planned. It was the quiet rebuilding of my life while hers faltered. By midsummer, at a lakeside gathering in Savonlinna, I stood by a bonfire, singing and swimming under the midnight sun. I felt light, untrapped. When asked if I missed her, I said, no, she had her peace, but mine was alive with new paths. Hers was a silence she couldn't fill. Years later, our paths crossed in Rovaniemi during a winter gathering. We snowshoed, ate reindeer stew, and waited for the northern lights. As the sky blazed with green and purple, I felt the aurora's quiet power. Then I heard her voice, fragile, calling my name. She stood nearby, older, wearier, clutching her coat. Silence hung between us, heavy with years. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. You look well, she said, regret lacing her words. I nodded. I am. She looked at the sky, avoiding my eyes. I didn't think you'd truly leave, she whispered. I thought you'd return. Her eyes, wet with tears, mirrored the aurora. It's been empty without you. I sought peace, but it was silence. Her sincerity was genuine, but belated. I'd built a life without her, rooted in my own mornings, friendships, and forest walks. You asked me to stay away, I said. So I did. The words struck her deeply. I thought you'd fight for me, she admitted. I thought that's what love was. I shook my head. Love isn't forcing someone to stay when they've asked you to go. It's knowing when to walk away. Tears froze on her cheeks as she whispered, I was wrong. I felt the echo of our past, nights in Kallio, trips to Savonlinna, quiet winters, but it was gone. She reached out, then stopped. Is there someone else? She asked. Yes, I said, honest but gentle. And even if there wasn't, that chapter's closed. Her face crumpled. The certainty she'd once wielded now shattered. She sobbed quietly, the aurora's beauty sharpening her regret. I didn't comfort her. She'd built this reality. The group moved back to the cottages, their laughter carrying. She lingered, hoping I'd soften, but I nodded politely and walked away, my step steady in the snow. Her sobs faded behind me, carried by the wind. She wasn't crying for me, but for the life she'd discarded, the steadiness she'd called suffocation. Under the northern lights, I felt no triumph, only clarity. She'd asked for peace, and I'd given it forever. I'd found freedom in the silence she thought she wanted, while she found only emptiness. Her regret was hers to carry, and my life had moved beyond her reach.